Okay, we're back on deck here at the Brass Monkey podcast, where we bring you the stories behind the music from some of the most exciting artists hitting the stage at the iconic venue down in the Shire. As always, I'm your host, Adam Simon, and today we have a very special guest, an artist whose journey through Australian rock has been nothing short of legendary. And we're going to get to hear some of those tales today and share them before we hit the stage at the Monkey in a few weeks. From his days as part of the iconic band Tumbleweed to forging his own path as a solo artist, Richie Weed has always been at the heart of the evolution of Australian grunge, and garage and rock. The current solo album Strays has been making waves, and his upcoming solo show, The Brass Monkey, with an amazing band behind him, we've got a lot to talk about. So Richie, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Adam. It's lovely to be here. Looking forward to it.
Mate, to quote Rodgers and Hammerstein, or Maria von Trapp, as I like to say, can we go back to the very beginning? I want to talk about the early 90s when Tumbleweed was really at the forefront of the Australian grunge movement.
My journey began as a drummer in a punk rock band called the Proton Energy Pills. And it was prior to the days of grunge. It was when there was this vast divide between high-energy guitar music and the mainstream. They were like two different worlds. But what I noticed is when I was playing drums in those bands, you'd be playing little venues like the Lansdowne or whatever in Sydney or Melbourne. And there was this small collective of community, and it sort of was around the world, really. And you could sort of sense this underground community was bubbling. It was exciting, right? It was really visceral. And we were signed to Waterfront Records, which was a pretty infamous Sydney punk rock label that had bands like the Hard-Ons and stuff. And they had this sort of look and feel. I wanted to be a part of that, right? So I sort of honed in on that very early on. And it was from doing shows with that band. We did the first Mudhoney tour of Australia in summer of 1990, and Dinosaur Jr. There was a couple of tours that came in succession. Started with Sonic Youth, then Dinosaur Jr., then Mudhoney. And all of them were sort of building and building. We're filling out rooms. And then we left Proton Energy Pills and started Tumbleweed. Me, Lenny, the guitarist in Tumbleweed, and Jay, his brother. And we'd made a deal with the guys out of Mudhoney because the bass player was living with Kurt Cobain, who had put out just a couple of little Nirvana things, but they had a license through Waterfront Records, licensed their records in Australia, right? So we had a bit of an inroad and a connection with them, and they were sort of like kindred spirits. And so Kurt was saying, he'd like to come to Australia. And Matt Lucan said, well, why don't you play with a Tumbleweed? I'll play with you. And so that deal was struck really early on before they were, Nirvana that we know. And true to his form and word that day, Steve Pav, who brought out Nirvana, remembered that conversation around the pool at the Diplomat Hotel in Melbourne. And when it came time, he booked in that Nirvana tour for us. And at that time, we sort of felt like we were sort of riding the same wave as everybody else, but then Nevermind came out and it just blew it all to Kingdom Come, and it was an amazing time to be a part of that whole world for that period.
Was that the Phoenician Club tour, or was that the one after the Nirvana?
Yeah, Phoenician Club. We did the Phoenician Club. We did 6 shows with them. Phoenician Club, the ANU in Canberra, a bunch at the Old Palace in Melbourne, and the Theberton Theatre in Adelaide. It was incredible. They were supposed to be smaller venues, like it was supposed to be like the Mudhoney tour. It's supposed to be like the Sonic Youth tour, just small things. And I think it was relatively small considering they were the biggest band in the world at the time, doing the Phoenician Club, which was an awesome venue in Sydney.
Great venue. That's the sort of gig I remember. I think talk about that gig. Richie Bennett used to talk about the Tide Test. So the MCG used to hold 80,000 people. I would talk to 600,000 people that were there, The same thing. So many people I know and worked with. And it's like, I was at the Phoenician Club gig, and I'm going, it didn't hold that many people. It's not possible. Or you weren't born, things like that. So but that's venues like that. And you say the Lansdowne and Sydney specifically, the Lansdowne or the Phoenician Club. I was looking at an old gig guide the other day, August 1991, old SMH gig guide. There was 250 gigs on a Sunday night.
Yeah.
And 400 gigs on Tuesday night.
Yeah.
It's changed since then, hasn't it?
As I mean, when I started, we were playing 5 nights a week around Sydney alone. And, a lot of the thing that I used to love about it back then was like the suburban pubs, Penshurst Inn and Isham Inn and,
Family.
Well, in Cronulla as well. And like it was great because you could do Sydney, play all these different little communities. You play 5 nights a week and be packed out every night.
It's interesting. I was talking to someone a few weeks ago, and I was saying, I used to get paid $600 a night in 1991. He goes, now I get paid the same, for a 5-piece band. It's like, that's changed, isn't it? And what lessons then have you taken over that evolution, not only as yourself as an artist, but seeing that genre and that industry evolve? What lessons have you taken away that you could go back and tell yourself from 30 years ago?
Oh, well, I don't know. I think
don't.
Yeah, best laid plans, best made plans sort of never come to fruition. Or I don't know, maybe that's being a bit negative. The things I think that were positive were, I think if you create a community, which we have more opportunity to do now via sort of like digital means, and you create a community and it seems exciting, people will want to be a part of that community. That's sort of like is timeless, I think. And I think back then with those venues, that's what you did. I mean, you went out to discover bands. It was cheap. I mean, if it wasn't free, it was $5 tops for 4 bands all night. Beer was cheap. So it was like, it was the thing to do and discover new music that way. But I think what drew people to some nights and not others is excitement, entertainment, and that still happens and resonates with people. So I think that's something. I think, one thing that is now that we didn't have that I thought would have been fantastic is just sort of like the ability to network, to have friends. Like when we toured overseas, there were great people we met that had that would have happened now, would be Facebook friends, and you'd sort of stay in touch and you'd continue that sort of thing. Whereas sort of like back then, you'd write it down on a piece of paper. The next night, you're driving like 200 kilometers to the next gig. You lose that bit of paper, it's gone. It's like, so people can build niches. Niches can exist now. Whereas a niche was hard to sort of like live outside of, what was. That's why I suppose there was such a big divide between mainstream and sort of alternative music when we first began. Is because, it was hard to make a living making music in a niche sort of thing. I mean, you'd get small venues of punk rock fans going to see it, but there was no commercial viability.
No. But I see that sense of community you mentioned as well. So you mentioned you're on Waterfront. I get that same sense of community on your current label, Farmer and the Owl. Do you see that that's just as important now, if not more so, to have that community from a professional company as well?
Yeah, I think also my goals have changed. Like, I mean, when we were younger, you sort of want to sort of take the thing as far as it can go. So you'll sign to a label like Atlantic Records, which we did, or a major label, and just rack up all this debt and, do that stuff because it's your opportunity to do it, because that's your one chance at cracking it. I think when you've been through it all, you realize why you really do music in the first place is sort of like as it's community, between band members and also it's just that creative sort of outlet, and it's spiritual in a way, right? Sort of. So the joy is in actually sort of like the process and doing it and playing gigs with people that you like and making records with people that you sort of trust. It's a good thing. So yeah, it's more important now than ever. I think Farmer and Owl, also, it's good for me, because like Farmer and the Owl, when I started in Wollongong, it was like, if we wanted a gig, we'd hire out the surf club or the scout hall or whatever, and just put them on, because there was nowhere to play unless you're a cover band in this town back then. And and we sort of had to sort of forge our own sort of scene here. And in the years that have happened since then, like so much, like a couple of kids that came to the early underage shows that we put on there became the guys that started up Farmer and the Owl and stuff like that. So they remember that was a part of their growing up, right? So going back and sort of closing that circle and sort of and sort of being a part of their thing now is sort of feels right. It feels like it feels like family type of thing. So it's good.
But I think that feeling as well you're talking about feels right. That has felt like this is your solo album Stray. It's like it still has that right feeling from your band material as well. Did you find that your influences were the same when came time to craft this album, or you grown up, or you'd evolved, or where did you draw those influences from?
Yeah, I think I'd grown up and evolved. I think I've been talking about doing a solo record for 20 years. And I wanted to write something that was sort of like 100% authentically me. So I sort of, I didn't know what it was going to be like, but people that were around me, like Matt, who plays bass, and Steve, the drummer from Tumbleweed, is the drummer on it. But the guys, the Player brothers who were in Pinheads and Tropical Strength, and he owns the studio up in Stanwell Park. It's real sort of like a close-knit sort of thing. Everybody brought their own sort of energy and nuance to it. I sort of had the basic songs, but it sort of just became a thing in the studio. We had the time and we had it was casual enough to be able to sort of like relax and sort of see where it was going to go. And so that was cool. I wanted it to be like that. And I wanted it to be a little bit sort of warts and all. So what we did was we set up in a circle. I would show them the song on acoustic guitar. They'd tinker around. We'd tinker around on the song for sometimes maybe 5 takes, but sometimes a few hours. And then we'd go, okay, this is ready, let's go. And we put it down together live like that. No headphones. And the only overdubs were sort of like the little pretty touches on top and vocals. Because we're all in the one room, and even the control board is in the same room as well. I wanted it to go to tape because I wanted it to have that sort of old school authenticity I like when I listened to records when I was sort of growing up. I wanted it to have that feel of singer-songwriter, but a little bit more, a little bit experimental, a little bit psychedelic. But I also wanted to draw on my heritage, which is Welsh heritage. And so there's like a lot of Celtic sort of folk music from my past that sort of creeps in, songs like Aurora Australis, which I wanted to write a song about my grandparents, and that was a song about them coming from Australia on the Aurora Australis on the boat. Because I think that's amazing to have some stories to tell. I think it's amazing that everyone in Australia has a story of getting here, their parents and their grandparents and, you know, the migration, and they're amazing stories. And I wanted to sort of acknowledge that and sort of pay, you know, my respects to my grandparents for bringing me to the greatest country in the world. So there were things like that. Plus there was a lot of sort of life lessons I've learned that I've sort of used songwriting as a way of personal therapy, purging or whatever, and also just things I've learned that I wanted to entwine in lyrics and stuff. So I felt compelled to make that record. And
I hear in the songwriting influence, so like the folk influences and paying homage to things, I see elements of like people like Guy Clark, you know, in some like One Day at a Time. And and then I wanted to see, like, when you're putting an album together like this and you're writing and you're working with some of your colleagues and your band members, are you also envisioning, so I had this discussion with Guy Clark once many years ago, are you also envisaging how these songs are going to play out on stage as well in that process, or does that come after for you?
Some of them, but I tell you what, doing them live has been a really enlightening experience because, I mean, from, you know, doing the past 30 years of Tumbleweed, it's always been such a physically demanding sort of thing. Or it's just been a physical show where the more energy I put into it, the more I throw myself around, the more I lose myself in the moment, the more exciting and entertaining it is, and the more of a sort of big rock show it is. Yeah. With this, what I've noticed is I've had to find the quiet calm, but sort of like be more present. I did sort of imagine certain songs like One Day at a Time and stuff like that. I wanted to be really a poignant moment in the set. Because it's advice for the dark times. Then there's things like Lady of Avalon, which I didn't know how that was going to translate live. But most of it, because I think we recorded most of it in that really sort of authentic live sense in a circle, it wasn't too much of an effort sonically to reproduce it. But I think it's just more in the expression, in what I'm saying in between songs, how I'm leading anything, how I make it exciting. Because I mean, it's quite diverse, but I've found it's about sharing myself when it comes to this record. It's about talking about me. It's about connecting with people and letting you into my life.
Which is essentially what live performance is, isn't it? All those things, sharing yourself and letting people in. And I was talking to someone the other day, and they wanted me to ask, do you incorporate some of the Tumbleweed material as well into your live performance now, into this set list we're going to see at the Brass Monkey?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
There are just a few songs that I have written over the years for Tumbleweed that might sort of veer on sort of the poppier, folkier side of things. We do reinterpretations of them. Songs like Glow in the Dark. We do Daddy Longlegs, but a completely reimagined one. There's a band with Natalie who plays flute on the record. She was in a band called Dandelion, and they did a wonderful version of Daddy Longlegs. That's how I met her, actually. Somebody sent me it and said, check this out. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. So we do her version of Daddy Longlegs. She sings it. There's a few.
Okay. And that's the interesting thing about where music can take us, especially in Australia. I mean, but you've seen the highs and the shifts. I mean, God, we're so challenged now by technology and AI's knocking on our doorstep and cost of living, pricing. You've seen all these, Richie. Where do you think the Australian, let's say the Australian music scene, the Australian rock scene stands now? And what excites you about today's bands that you might see?
I think there's an amazing amount of fantastic bands in Australia. I like to hear at the moment, especially in relation to the lack of Australian music in ARIA charts in the last 2 years and the lack of Australian music in the Triple J Hottest 100. And it's created a lot of conversation about what's going wrong. And the globalization of music and Spotify and all this sort of stuff. Now, before Spotify, it was Sony, it was like, Universal, it was the big labels pushing American content, pushing English content over here. But there was still enough sort of local venues that sort of allowed bands to really forge their own sort of path away from that.
Yeah.
I think that is still possible. And I see it definitely in town in Wollongong. I did a show last year called Gong Crawl, 100 bands across 10 venues in town, all free and all local. And it was standing room at every venue all night. And I just thought, well, there's the people. They're here to see it. It is free. There's 100 bands, 10 venues, and people were walking from one to the other. And it was like, it was awesome. It was like, okay, this is a sign. This is a sign of things can happen. There obviously should be more support federally and stuff. There should be, more incentives for radio, for TV, for any sort of broadcast to play Australian stuff. I think that there's a possibility where I'd like to see some sort of regulation for streaming and Spotify. So there is incentive for Australian playlists or things like that within this country. Or there is some sort of something, I don't know. Even if it's just sort of like something that's sort of put into the algorithm. So if people are listening to this style of music in Australia, it pops up with, here's a bunch of other bands that are playing that stuff in Australia. That would be something that could be done, surely. Otherwise, I think it comes down to people just doing the hard road like they always have. And I don't think that, it's better than ever for bands out there. They're better players. Like they're just switched on. They can just check out the internet and learn everything, and they can access things that used to be so hard to access. I can remember looking around to Frank Zappa's Freak Out album and trawling town city for months. And then found it at Glen A. Baker's Time Warp, and it cost like $60. I was like, oh my God, this is the most expensive record ever. And I only wanted it for one song for Trouble Every Day. But now, like if you've got that inclination, you want to hear, oh, what does that sound like? Bang, you can find out what it is. So people have these vast taste in music. Like they might like Charlie XCX, and then they might like some obscure punk rock band. It's just weird. Like there's no no separation except for maybe like I'm a metalhead or I'm into blues or whatever. There are the purists, right? But
even since post-COVID, I've seen that, like in the States, especially in Canada, the festivals have gone from being jazz festivals or blues festivals or rock festivals to music festivals. So you'll have Metallica on, and you'll have a jazz band,
yeah,
the preceding band and things like that, and that's been a really interesting shift. And yeah, I think it's
right.
quite right saying, like, if you had said to me 25 years ago, well, Charlie XCX will have 7 songs in the top 100 in Triple J, we'd all be laughing at ourselves, but that's what it is like. And so in one sense, yes, radio used to dictate to us what to listen to, and now the algorithm sort of does, but you can also explore. I like to go in and put a song in and then see all the different cover versions, different variations of it and so on, and you see all these trippy things, and there
I
are
love
some...
the discovery aspect of it is awesome.
Yeah.
I listen to stuff and then that record runs out and then you're listening to something else. You go, what's that? That's awesome. Yeah. And it's something you've never heard of and it's great. So yeah, there's a lot of really good positives. I just think it's as far as Australian music goes, I'd like to see more festivals like yours and ours that try and showcase Australian bands a bit more. But I mean, people are trying, and I think it's just a matter of time. It's just got to keep on doing the hard yards. Looking for a meaning, trying to find a reason to try to carry on. Every little step we take's a new direction, gets back at our reflection, and all our hope was gone. Why am I drowning all my sorrows?
So Richie, we've got your show coming up at the Brass Monkey on the 7th of March, and we know that it's a dinner and show. It's a theatre type restaurant, great place to eat and drink and enjoy some fantastic live music. You've got a guest table down the front. Who are 4 people that you would invite? Musicians, artists, anyone from history. Who would you like to have there? Well, it would be scary, but I'd have to say David Bowie. I think you'd have some good conversation, and I think you'd enjoy the food and wine at the Brass Monkey. Yes. And it would make me sort of try really hard. What era Bowie? But Bowie came in all different sizes and packages and eras. What era Bowie would you have? My favourite Bowie album's Hunky Dory. I like the early 70s stuff, but I'll take him in any era, and I can quiz him about the early 70s. So Bowie walks in dressed as the guy from Labyrinth. He sits in the front row, that big hair going. I'd have to look away. But yeah. Okay, who else? You're right. I think let's go with Marilyn Monroe. Mm-hmm. I think she'd be interesting. Yeah. I've always been a fan of Marilyn Monroe. And I think locally I'll go with somebody like Dave Graney. I think Dave Graney is a cool cat. And I always like having to chat to him. And he always has like an interesting thing about looking at the world. He's written some good books that I've enjoyed. Dave Graney's one of the artists I look at in history and go, should have been massive, should have been an international superstar. And yeah, I just, it was just something which has been enrapturing. I mean, the late 90s, I just remember being enraptured in his live show and his performances and his recordings. They were, essence is cool. Trod his own path, done his own thing. It's like trailblazed. Yeah, love that. Okay, one more. I'd probably be, first one that comes to my head is like Steve Kilbey from the Church, maybe, because I love the Church, but he'd be hard to have in the crowd because I know that he'd sort of be really intense. But yeah, maybe I could break through that tough exterior. A few bottles of wine and a chicken schnitzel. Yeah. Well, maybe, Tim Finn. Tim Finn would be pretty cool. Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah. That'd be cool. Well, just leave a piece of paper on the table and say, if you boys all write a song while you're sitting here, I'll pick up the tab. Yeah. What a fantastic collaboration you make there. Yeah. Excellent. If any of those people are still alive and listening to this, except for come on down. Yeah, come on down. We'll go a front row seat for you all. So be in touch. Yeah. Hey, thank you so much for your time today. It's really been fantastic. And just to know, you truly are, as I said in my opener, one of the iconic parts of the foundation of not just grunge music in Australia, but rock and garage music. In a time when seminal bands like, Tumbleweed were needed, and we had like the Hard On Tour, been around since, 1876, since the first Fleet appeared. But, you guys really
Well,
paved the way for so many young bands to come and follow through right up until today. And so I think you really need to
thanks.
stop and pause for that. But I want to ask you as our last question. So we're at the Brass Monkey Friday, March the 7th. What's it feel like to be Richie Weed on stage every time when you're playing these days?
It feels great. It really does. I'm sort of a lot more comfortable in my skin. I felt like, when you're growing up, I think we all wear masks at different times, a lot of the time. And I think that lately stage is the most authentic me that I've been. I love getting back on stage because it's kind of like, it's my timeless moment. And it's awesome. It's where I'm really me without any of the other stuff that sort of takes over your life and world. So
That sounds a very healthy and very healing place to be.
It
I
is.
think the album itself, Strays, has that essence from it. It's almost it's cool, calm, and collective.
No,
And I think that's something which we're going to experience together.
That's where I'm going, man. I think, also it's amazing. Music is amazing, but it's amazing that I'm just continuing to learn about what I'm doing. Like it's always fresh. And I think sort of when you take on something new, like doing, what I'm doing now, you learn so much about yourself and about performing and about music and about, it's so vast. You live in these tiny little narrow things, and it's good just to blow that open and just see how much else is out there and what's possible.
But I think with an album like this and a performance like we're going to see at the Brass Monkey, you say you learn as an artist. I think us as the audience also get to learn and get to share and get to experience that as well. I think that Strays is definitely that type of album which we can share both as the artist and the audience, because there's space for us both there to be in that one essence for whether it be an hour and a half, or 2 hours.
Yeah.
Not just with yourself, with your band members and people who have followed you, or people who have come and been on that journey with you. Most importantly, yourself. You sit in front and center of the stage. But Richie, thank you so much. This has been an incredible chat, and appreciate your time. Thank you so much for taking us through this journey that you've been on. And, from Tumbleweed to your solo work, it's definitely going to be an interesting evening, beautiful evening of fantastic music with friends, old and new. March 7th, tickets now on sale. We're going to put the link in the show notes. Awesome. And guys, this is going to be one for the books. Please don't miss it. This is an artist who's definitely paved the way in a venue which is one of the last bastions of celebrating that fantastic era of music and continuing to support as we grow into new pathways and new albums. New album Strays, it's out now. And Richie, we'll see you on March the 7th. Thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure, Adam. Thanks, mate.